guys, and welcome back to Chapter 11 of Naya Nuki. Now remember, pay close attention so you can answer those questions with complete sentences. Let's get started. Chapter 11, the end. Naya Nuki moved away from the river that afternoon and took shelter for the night among some dwarf cedar trees that hid her very well. During that night, Naya Nuki woke up as usual to listen and smell for any signs of danger. As she got up on one elbow, she began to shake. Her head swam with dizziness. Her stomach turned over and over. She burned with a fever and shivered with chills at the same time. Naya Nuki felt very weak and slumped back down under her buffalo hide for warmth. Her head pounded with pain. She was very sick and completely helpless. The long night seemed endless, and when daylight finally came, Naya Nuki felt even worse. It took all her strength just to sit up. When she did sit up, her stomach seemed to come up into her throat. Soon she was vomiting until her stomach ached. When the vomiting ended, there was a sour taste in Naya Nuki's mouth, but she felt better for a few minutes. Then the weakness returned. Chills shook her body. Slumped back into her buffalo hide bed. What would Naya Nuki do? Just when she felt sure she would make it home, this terrible illness took all of her strength and made her helpless. The night had been cold and damp. Clouds filled the sky, and the day was as cold and damp as the night had been. It threatened to rain. Naya Nuki just lay in misery, not even caring about the weather, food, water, or safety. Her awful sickness made her forget everything. How long would she lie here helpless? What could she do to help herself? She felt so lonely. She longed for her mother, who always had been there when she was hurt or sick. Naya Nuki buried her head in the buffalo hide. The day wore on. Afternoon came. A light rain drizzled down. In the cold and dampness, Naya Nuki rolled and tossed. She burned with a high fever. Her throat was sore and her head pounded. She slept for short periods of time. Night came, and with it even colder weather, and then snow. The dwarf cedars helped shelter Naya Nuki from the wet snow. All night, Naya Nuki suffered. It was a long, long night, and it seemed day would never come. When daylight finally came, the snow changed to freezing rain, increasing Naya Nuki's misery. For the second day, Naya Nuki would not move from her buffalo hide. She felt no better. Sitting up made her feel even worse. She began to wonder if this would be the end of her. The end of her daring try for freedom. Even the end of her short life. She felt so sick she almost didn't care if she lived or died. Another miserable night followed, and Naya Nuki's 22nd day began clear and sunny. The warmth brought a new hope to this sick and weak Indian girl. Naya Nuki raised up to one elbow to look around her. Her lips and tongue were dry, sore, and cracked. Water from the melting snow dripped from the small cedar trees above her. Naya Nuki cupped her hands to catch some water. She drank it slowly with her trembling hands. The water soothed her parched throat. Immediately she began coughing. Her stomach ached as the water reached it. Naya Nuki slumped back under her buffalo hide. She would rest for a while and then try to move. She knew she must do something to help herself, or she would die in this lonely place. When Naya Nuki did sit up again, she felt weak and dizzy. Her legs were wobbly as she stood up, clinging to a small tree. The sun was warm, and the snow was melting fast. She still shivered and shook all over. It was all she could do to pick up her belongings and stumble toward a distant grove of large pine trees. Naya Nuki had to stop often to lean against a tree for rest. The grove of trees was on the edge of a low ridge. The other side of the ridge sloped down to a river valley, which was a mile wider. Naya Nuki reached the ridge and sat down to rest her weak and achy body. Her head rested against a tree. Her eyes were closed. It was then that a strange smell reached her sensitive nostrils. No, it wasn't a strange smell. She remembered it from somewhere in her past, but could not remember exactly where or when she had smelled it before. Naya Nuki sat for some time, resting and trying to remember where she had smelled this odor before. Then suddenly she remembered. It was a smell she had known as a small child. Her people knew of places in the mountains where hot water poured from the earth. Naya Nuki had visited several of these places as a small girl. The hot water had a strong smell. Her people bathed in the hot water and gave it to those who were sick. They drank it as a cure for many illnesses. Naya Nuki moved slowly in the direction of the odor. In the meadow of thick grasses, she found a spring. The spring water was oozing towards the river. It was hot, and the sulfur smell was very strong. Naya Nuki lay flat on her stomach, lowered her head, and drank the hot, bitter-tasting water. The short walk had exhausted her. After drinking the hot sulfur water, she found a hiding place in the willows nearby. The day was warm, and she was soon sound asleep. When Naya Nuki awoke, she felt much better, though. Still weak and wobbly on her feet, she returned to the spring for another drink. Then she was sound asleep in her hiding place once again. The next time Naya Nuki woke up, it was dark and much cooler. For the first time since her illness, she felt hungry. She ate a little from her supply of porcupine meat, berries, and camas roots. Again, she drank from the hot spring. The bitter-tasting sulfur water was helping to fight the illness that made her feel so miserable and helpless. Naya Nuki lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Then she fell asleep again. The sun was well up before Naya Nuki awoke. She had slept for almost 24 hours since her first drink from the hot spring. She still felt weak and shaky, but her strength was returning. Naya Nuki moved slowly into the open area on the hillside to get a better view of the valley below. Once again, she was thinking about the danger of being recaptured and the danger from wild animals. Naya Nuki could see a great distance into the valley as it stretched out before her. Running from north to south towards the great river, the land had not changed much since she had left the place where the Yellowstone River flowed into the great river. But ahead she saw more hills, more trees, and more rock formations carved out by wind and water. Naya Nuki remembered this river valley and knew she was more than halfway along in her struggle to get back to her people. She was still weak. Her moccasins were worn through, and there were many miles of rough travel ahead. Each day she seemed to be a great hint of winter in the air. Naya Nuki decided to rest one more day. She remembered that she had left the 6 pieces of buffalo hide on their drying frames under the dwarf willows where she had become so sick. She must go back to the pieces of hide. She would spend the day making 3 new pairs of moccasins. The snow had all melted. Naya Nuki went in search of the 6 pieces of buffalo hide. In the daylight, she could see dwarf cedars in every direction, but the right spot could not be far away. It took her an hour to find the right clump of cedars. She picked up the frames and returned to the willows near the hot spring. The pieces of hide were not as dry as they should be, but Naya Nuki could not wait. She quickly went to work on the first moccasin. Her knife had become almost a friend to her. She used it every day on her journey and constantly checked to see if it was still tied to the side of her. Its loss would be a serious loss indeed. Naya Nuki worked smoothly, cutting the hide from the proper size to shape her foot, to fit her foot. She cut strips of hide to use as thread. She cut holes along the edges of the hide so the strips could be passed through easily. Naya Nuki worked most of the day, stopping only to drink more of the hot sulfur water and to eat from her food supply. Her strength was returning steadily. When the moccasin was finished, Naya Nuki looked at the 3 pairs of beautiful new moccasins. She threw away her old ones and pulled on a new pair. She walked to a lookout spot, and her new moccasins felt so good on her feet. Once again, Naya Nuki was eager to be moving and again excited about reaching freedom in the mountains. But she needed another night of rest first. Back at the hot spring, Naya Nuki remembered how her people dammed up the hot water, making pools for bathing. She would do the same now. First, she gathered rocks and used them to make a small circle around the spring. With her knife, she loosened clumps of sod to pack between and behind the rocks. As she worked, the water began to fill the circle. The small dam grew in height until the water was 2 feet deep. Naya Nuki removed her elkskin dress and her new moccasins and lowered herself steadily into the warm water. Naya Nuki felt so relaxed and warm. She moved to the side of the pool and lay back, resting her head on a clump of sod. She rubbed the warm water all over her face. She rolled onto her stomach and put her head under the water, Getting up on her knees, she ran her fingers through her hair to remove dirt and dust that was caked there. She rubbed her legs and arms, washing away dirt and dead skin left from scratches and cuts she received climbing the tree to escape the grizzly bear. When she was finished cleaning her body and hair, Naya Nuki once more lay back to enjoy the relaxing feeling of the hot water brought to her small, weary body. She lay still for 30 minutes. Her eyelids became heavy, and she almost fell asleep. When she lifted herself from the wonderful hot pool, her skin was wrinkled from being in the water so long. She felt better than she had since beginning her lone run to freedom. That night, Naya Nuki slept soundly. And that will do it for Chapter 11. So, go back and answer those questions. Make sure if you don't know the answer, you go back and re-listen. Restate the question, just like we practice in class. Make sure you click submit. See you tomorrow, guys.